Well, one of the more interesting and complicated views of habituation and sensitization comes from, again, from the dogs with electric shocks, and some of the side research in that area created what we now call the standard pattern of affective dynamics. Excuse me. The standard pattern of affective dynamics means that we have well, first of all, a standard pattern. So there's a regular pattern that we see every time we present a stimulus. And affective means emotional, and dynamics means changing. So we're seeing a standard pattern of changing emotions, right? So let's take a look at this. Now, any emotion-provoking stimulus will create this same basic pattern. So whether it's a happy stimulus or a sad stimulus, that is, you get news you win the lottery, or you get an electric shock, it still elicits an emotion. Okay, and as you can see here in figure 4 and 5 on the left-hand side, when we first present the stimulus, let's just go with our electric shock. You can imagine when we first put a dog in one of these boxes and electrify the floor, when that shock first comes on, it is painful. And if we're measuring the painfulness of this shock, the felt painfulness, it immediately jumps high to a peak. We call it the peak of A here, as you see in the left diagram. Now, that peak initial reaction wanes, right, very quickly, and so it comes down a little bit and then steadies out. So we get adaptation and then a steady level. So you can imagine a shock that lasts, say, 5 seconds, right? It first comes on, boy, you just tighten up, oh, yeah, and now you're at the steady level and the shock goes off, right? The dash line then shows your kind of relief from the electric shock. So it goes off, whew, right? You don't just go back to neutral. You actually go further than neutral. Now, in this diagram, we call it state B, whereas state A was the reaction to the electric shock or to any emotion-eliciting stimulus. Okay, so then we get an after reaction. This peak of B is our after reaction, and of course, over time, it decays away, and we do return to normal. Now we give another electric shock, we see the same thing again. We give another shock, the same thing again. So these first few electric shocks or first few presentations of any emotion eliciting stimulus produces this basic pattern, right? We also see habituation here and sensitization. So after we have done this many times, 10, 12, 15 times, right, repeated this electric shock, what we see is the initial reaction, the peak, has habituated. It's much weaker than it was. Remember, habituation is a decrease in responsiveness, and if you've received 5 or 10 electric shocks in a row, you're pretty much used to it. And even though it's the same level of electric shock, when it first comes up, oh, yeah, right? You don't reach as high a peak, and it quickly steadies out. However, the after reaction, okay, the after reaction sensitizes. We have a stronger after reaction after many stimulations than we had after a few stimulations. So we see the peak of B is now much, much lower, right? So a much stronger after reaction. What this has produced is our drug abuse model, right? As an emotion-provoking stimulus, taking a drug evokes emotional responses. And, whether it's illegal drugs or legal drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana, any heroin, any drug you want to talk about, that when you first take the drug, you've never had this drug before, and you first take it, you get a big peak. Now, I'm sure many of you have tried alcohol, and you may even recall the first time you tried alcohol, and how that one drink just sent you loopy. How, whew. Or how about that first cigarette? Oh, my goodness. You actually got high off of tobacco. So we get a big peak initially and steadies out, and then an after reaction. I'm guessing that, one beer doesn't produce too much of a hangover as an after reaction. All right. However, if you've been at this a really long time, let's say you've been drinking now for 10 years and you're up to 6-pack a day, and you keep drinking for another 10, 20, 30 years and 40 years of drinking, you're up to 12-pack a day. And now what are you getting out of that alcohol? Not a whole lot. Right? It takes more and more of the same drug to get the same old high you used to get. Now, it's kind of unfair. This isn't totally true of marijuana. It's one of those drugs that we're not sure what's going on with, because it doesn't seem to have any real serious effects at all, even behaviorally. But nonetheless, let's get back to our model. So we now see the peak lessens, right? Same with cigarettes, right? You take more and more cigarettes then, and now don't get me wrong, there is a physically addictive stage to some of these things, as well as psychological addiction. So psychologically speaking, we're not getting nearly the high we used to get after lots of experience. However, trying to quit smoking, trying to quit drinking, now when you're trying to cut yourself off, you're in this major after reaction stage. The peak of B here is so strong, it's overwhelming. You simply can't quit, or it makes it incredibly difficult to quit. So our drug abuse model predicts both that it should take more and more of the drug, that people as they become psychologically addicted require more and more of the drug, trying to reach the same old high they used to get, and it's hopeless because habituation means you won't get back to that same old high. And the after reaction sensitizes, so as you become addicted, it gets harder and harder to quit. The opponent, this is called then, well, let's look at that was the standard pattern of affective dynamics, and the theory that goes along with this is called the opponent process theory. In the opponent process theory, we have these two invisible assumed processes that oppose each other, okay? You know how psychologists are. They like to come up with theories about invisible things going on inside the mind, and here we are with one right here. So the idea being that you have an A process, and that's the physiological, emotional, psychological process that has to do with the actual incoming of the stimulus. So the stimulus itself kicks off the A process, right? The A process, once it reaches a certain level, starts the B process. So in this middle panel here showing the underlying opponent processes, you see that A goes up, reaches a peak, levels off, and soon after A reaches the plateau, B starts and B goes down, right? And you can see then after many stimulations that A has habituated and B has sensitized. Now if you take these two together, the A and B, and add them together, you'll get the manifest affective response you see in the top graph, the A minus B in both cases. That is, if you subtract the solid line from the dotted line in the underlying opponent processes, the A process from the B process, you will get the standard pattern of affective dynamics. So the two opponent processes create this behavior, and the theory then is the A process habituates and the B process sensitizes. What about love? It's an emotion-provoking stimulus, right? You remember your first time you fell in love? This is usually the one that hits the peak. Oh, you couldn't get enough of that boy. You couldn't get enough of that girl, right? All you wanted to do is spend time with them, okay? Every time you were together, there was a peak of affective responses. And as the evening wore down, of course, you couldn't maintain that initial peak. Let's take an example. Let's say, the young man going to pick up a young woman at her house, go out on a date, right? The first date. Oh, my goodness, the girl's getting all ready. The parents don't know why she's freaking out so much. It's just a boy coming over after all. And, she's trying to be cool but failing. And the boy's the same way, just a nervous bunch of bundles, right, coming up to the front door. And when they see each other, oh my goodness, hearts race, respiration increases. It's great. Now, it can't maintain that peak or we'd all die, so as the evening wears on, it drops down a little bit, right? And finally it's time to go home. But dropping down a little bit isn't gone away. Remember, we're at the adaptation and steady level of it, which is still considerably above neutral, right? Love is a wonderful thing. So you're taking your date home, and here you are, or being taken home by your date, whichever, and you linger. You sit in the car, you don't want to part, you want to stay together, you want to keep this feeling going. Finally, you do part, you have to go in the house, right? Go up to your bedroom, the boy goes home, and what happens? You get a phone call. I mean, he may not even make it home yet, and he's calling on the phone. Had a great time tonight. I love you so much. Boo, boo, boo. Oh, my goodness, life is good. And you wind up talking on the phone until the sun rises, right? Ah, life is wonderful. Now, if you were to break up with this boy in the next week or two, month or two, right? Yeah, it'll be painful and upsetting, but that peak of B, the after reaction, won't be so hard, and you'll overcome it and eventually fall in love again. But what happens if this is the one? You finally fall in love forever. You marry this person. You stay married 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Well, it gets worse as time goes by. And take a look at this. Old age. What happens now? Oh, well, you know how old people are. Sure, they still love each other, right? It's above neutral after all. And but, instead of that long, lingering French kiss as you go to work every morning when you were newlyweds, now it happens, little, peck on the cheek, see you later, honey, have a nice day, okay, that sort of thing, right? That peak of A is habituated. What about the after reaction? What happens if you've been married 50 years and your spouse dies? The average lifespan of a person married 50 years with a dead spouse is 2 years after the death of a spouse. The after reaction of love is grief, and the grief is so powerful it can kill. Two years. Well, that's it. Opponent process theory. Notice opponent process theory is based not on learning. It is based strictly on unlearned behavior, these reflexive behaviors that are survival mechanisms. That's it for now. We'll see you at the next lecture.